She looked me in the eyes and said if you had paid more attention none of this would have happened. And I believed her. Betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers in locked phones and half-hearted kisses. She didn't leave me. She just stopped arriving. She didn't say it with cruelty. She said it with calm, like a surgeon explaining how they just removed the wrong organ. And somehow I nodded, as if I'd deserved it. I started noticing it in the spaces between us, not just the literal ones, like when she began sleeping farther away on the bed, but the quieter ones. The pauses in conversation that used to feel like comfort now felt like alarms. She used to hum while cooking, always out of tune but charming in its own way. Lately, the kitchen was silent. And so was she. Her touch changed too. Where once she lingered, a hand on my shoulder, fingers brushing mine at the dinner table, now it felt like she recoiled from contact. As if I was something she used to love, now gathering dust. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe I'd gotten lazy, predictable. I worked long hours. I forgot anniversaries. Maybe the fault was mine. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't hit like thunder. It creeps in like fog, making everything seem uncertain. Even your own reflection. I tried to fix it. Cooked dinner twice a week. Bought her favorite wine. Watched those dumb reality shows she loved just to laugh at the things she laughed at. But it didn't matter. Every time I reached out, she deflected. Turned the conversation into an audit of my shortcomings. You never listen. You always forget what I say. I just need space. Space. That word started to taste like rust. Like something decaying. Still, I held on. Then one night, I walked into the living room to find her smiling at her phone. Not the polite kind, the kind that reaches your eyes. I hadn't seen that smile in months. And it wasn't meant for me. When she noticed me watching, she turned the screen face down and asked if I'd remembered to take out the trash. I had. But the rail garbage was starting to smell and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stopped asking questions, not because I trusted her, but because I was afraid of the answers. She stopped saying, "I love you" first. Then she stopped saying it at all. Her phone was suddenly password protected, always at her side. Even in the bathroom. Once she left it charging while she showered and sprinted back in soaking wet when she realized it wasn't in reach. That was the night I stopped sleeping. The next morning she made breakfast. Her usual scrambled eggs and avocado toast, arranged just so. But I noticed she didn't eat. Just sipped her coffee and scrolled endlessly. I asked if everything was okay. She looked up, eyes flat, and said if you had paid more attention, none of this would have happened. And I believed her. That was the worst part. Because part of me still thought I could fix it. That somehow if I just tried harder, she might come back. But you can't reach someone who's already gone, especially when they're still standing right in front of you. Her phone never left her hand, but somehow she was always too tired to text me back. She didn't lie with words. She lied with indifference. I didn't lose her all at once. I lost her in glances, in silences, in unanswered texts. There's a specific kind of silence that follows you around when the person you love stops loving you. It wasn't just that she stopped laughing at my jokes. It was the way she paused, not because she was waiting to laugh, but because she was deciding if it was even worth the energy to pretend. Our conversations shrank like dying plants. One-word answers. Nods without eye contact. Fine. Okay. Sure. We used to finish each other's thoughts. Now I was the only one thinking them. I told myself it was stress. Work. Maybe hormones. I Googled emotional burnout in relationships like I was researching a patient instead of watching my marriage collapse in front of me. But it was that one night, the night she smiled at her phone, that changed everything. We were on the couch. I was halfway through telling her a story about something dumb from work. She wasn't really listening, not even pretending to anymore. Then her phone lit up and she smiled. Not just a polite smile, it was the kind that glowed in her eyes. I hadn't seen that smile in weeks. Maybe months. And it wasn't for me. She turned the screen over like it was muscle memory and said, "Go on." Sorry. Just a stupid meme. But the air shifted. Like when thunder rolls low before a storm. I laughed it off, kept talking, but inside, something twisted hard, deep, right beneath the ribs. I didn't recognize it then. I do now. That was the first time I felt fear. The next few days were a blur of pretending. Pretending not to notice how quickly she answered messages that weren't mine. Pretending the lipstick I saw in her purse was for me even though I hadn't seen it on her in weeks. Pretending not to care that she changed her passcode. We used to talk in bed. Those half-asleep conversations that only happen in the dark. Weird dreams, childhood memories, bucket list places. I realized one night that it had been weeks since we'd had one. Now she faced the wall. AirPods in. Back turned. She said she was just tired. Every night, I'm just tired. But her screen time told a different story. 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours a night. Tired, but scrolling. Tired, but texting someone. I asked once, who are you always messaging so late? She didn't look up. Just group chats. Work stuff. Work stuff. At 11:42 p.m. I nodded. Said okay. Even smiled. Because I was afraid that if I pushed even a little, the truth would come spilling out like blood from a wound I wasn't ready to see. And maybe that's when the betrayal really started, not in her phone or in someone else's arms, but in my silence. Because I let it happen. Her stories didn't add up, but she told them so calmly it made me question my own memory. She didn't need to lie well. She just needed me to want to believe her. I didn't trust her stories, but I trusted the silence between them even less. It's strange how you can watch something fall apart in real time and still convince yourself it's fine, just a flickering light, not a fire. I was at Megan's, she said, slipping off her heels like it was any other Thursday. I nodded. Until I opened Instagram later that night. Megan had posted a boomerang from a rooftop bar in another city. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. The next morning I asked her, just casually, "Hey, thought you were with Megan?" She laughed soft, practiced. "Oh, we FaceTimed." I never said I went there. But she had. I knew she had. Still, her voice was so smooth, so certain I felt my grip on the memory slip. Maybe she didn't say that. Maybe I heard wrong. It started happening more often. She'd mention dinner with coworkers, but later forget who was there. Names changed. Details blurred. She said they went for sushi, then corrected herself. No, it was Italian. She claimed they saw a late movie, but the theater had closed early that night for renovations. Each time I brought something up, she had a reason. And each time it was just convincing enough to make me feel like the crazy one. Paranoid. Insecure. Overthinking. That's the worst kind of gaslight, the kind that flickers in your own head. I became an expert in second-guessing myself. Once she said she'd be home by 9. At 11:20 she texted that her phone had died. But the message was timestamped with 87% battery. I stared at it, wondering if it was a glitch. Or maybe she just didn't notice. Or maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. Because that's what love does, it holds a magnifying glass to the truth and begs it to be something else. I stopped asking as many questions. I started writing down the answers she gave. Not to trap her, but to anchor myself to something real. To prove I wasn't losing my mind. But trust doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks. Hairline fractures that deepen with each contradiction, each careless excuse. She'd still kiss me goodbye. Still tell me she loved me. And I clung to those scraps like lifelines, not because they felt honest, but because they used to be. I wasn't blind. I was just in love with the version of her that hadn't started lying yet. "Why are you lying to me?" I asked. She blinked, then smiled. "You're overthinking again." She walked in smelling like a stranger. I let her crawl into my bed anyway. The first lie doesn't hurt because it's clever. It hurts because you want so badly for it to be true. It was a Friday. The kind that drags, emails piling up, clock ticking too slow. But I told myself it would be worth it. She'd be home late, she said. Big meeting. Might grab drinks after. So I waited. Made her favorite pasta. Lit the candle we used on anniversaries, even though this wasn't one. By 9:47 p.m., the pasta was cold. By 11:12, the candle had burned out. By 1:23 a.m., the door finally opened. She walked in like nothing was wrong. Hair tousled. Makeup blurred at the edges. And the scent, not hers. Not mine. Someone else's cologne clung to her skin like an accusation. I stood from the couch. Not angry. Just hollow. "You didn't answer any of my calls," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, then smiled. That smile, the one people wear when they're rewriting history in real time. "My phone died," she said, kicking off her shoes. "We went out after the meeting. Just a few drinks. I told you, remember?" She hadn't. Not exactly. But maybe she had hinted. Maybe I'd forgotten. I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to. So I nodded. Said okay. Sat back down. But that night, something inside me didn't sit with me. It left. I couldn't name it, maybe trust, maybe innocence. But it slipped out the window when I wasn't looking, quiet and final, like breath fogging glass. She crawled into bed beside me, curled up like she always did, her body warm from wherever she'd been. She whispered, "Love you," as if those words still meant what they used to. I said it back. But my chest felt like an echo chamber, the kind you scream into only to hear nothing return. That was the first lie. Not just hers, mine too. Because I lied to myself when I decided to let it go. When I chose silence over suspicion. When I convinced myself that love was still enough to fix what had already begun to rot. She fell asleep easily that night. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more lies it would take before I stopped pretending to believe them. I wasn't looking for proof, I was looking for peace. Instead, I found both and they destroyed me. She borrowed my shirt. He borrowed my wife. I didn't find out. I finally caught up to what my heart had known all along. It wasn't some grand investigation. I didn't dig through drawers or follow her car through backstreets. I just heard the shower running. She'd left her phone on the nightstand, something she never used to do. It buzzed once. Then again. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Just a single letter. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I was tired of pretending not to see what was in front of me. The phone wasn't locked. Or maybe I knew the code without realizing it, 4 digits that used to mean something. The messages were deliberate. Sparse. No names. No plans. Just fragments of a secret life. Still thinking about last Thursday. I can still smell you. Wish you were here right now. I scrolled. And then I saw it. A photo. Blurry, low light. But there was no mistaking it. Her. In my favorite shirt, the one she always said felt like home. But the bed wasn't ours. And the smile wasn't mine. It was soft. Intimate. The kind of smile you save for the beginning of something forbidden. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't yell. My hands shook, yes. But my heart stayed eerily still. Because it already knew. It had known for weeks. Maybe months. That quiet ache, that constant second-guessing, it was never anxiety. It was truth knocking gently, waiting to be let in. I sat on the edge of the bed, the shower still running behind the door, the sound of falling water muffling everything else. For a moment, I felt like I was outside my own body, watching myself unravel in slow motion. There was no confrontation. No dramatic shout. Just silence. A silence so loud it hollowed me out from the inside. When she stepped out wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing had changed, I looked at her and realized something terrifying. She had already moved on. I was just the one who hadn't caught up. I asked myself if confronting her would fix anything or just confirm the truth I wasn't ready to face. I didn't ask if she still loved me. I was too afraid the answer would come without hesitation. Some betrayals hurt more when you still love the person holding the knife. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, I folded the truth into a quiet corner of my chest and carried it like a sickness, silent, terminal, mine. Every morning after that felt like walking through fog. She'd kiss my cheek, ask how I slept. I'd smile. Tell her I was fine. We played pretend together like strangers in a play neither of us auditioned for. But inside I was fracturing. I made her coffee. Held her hand when we crossed the street. Said I love you and tried to remember if I meant it or if I was just chasing the echo of someone I used to know. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She touched me like she was performing intimacy, not feeling it. But I played along. Because the alternative, ripping off the mask, felt like stepping off a cliff I wasn't sure I'd survive. I asked myself impossible questions. Had I changed? Had I stopped listening? Had I become the kind of man who gets left without ever realizing he was leaving too? There were moments I'd stare at the ceiling late at night, the weight of her sleeping beside me more unbearable than her absence might have been. I wanted to confront her, but some part of me was afraid. Not of what she'd say, but how calmly she'd say it. Like the ending was old news. Like my heartbreak was overdue. So I did nothing. I smiled through dinners. Watched her text with the screen tilted away from me. Took her silence and folded it into my own. Because somehow, even after everything, I still loved her. That was the cruelest part. The betrayal hurt, but the guilt was worse. Guilt for wondering if I caused this. Guilt for staying. Guilt for not hating her. I remembered our early days. How her laugh used to light up rooms. How I once believed we were unbreakable. And now? Now I was learning how love can rot quietly, slowly, like fruit left out too long. It wasn't gone. It was just no longer sweet. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity I was after. I didn't follow her out of jealousy. I followed her because the truth stopped knocking and started pounding. That smile used to be mine. Now it was a password to someone else's life. I didn't want to become that person, the one who snoops through phones, screenshots texts, plays detective in their own life. But love makes you blind. And betrayal forces you to see. So I started watching. Not with anger. With intention. With the quiet focus of someone searching for answers they already suspect but can't yet accept. Her call logs changed, fewer incoming, more deleted. Her social media went quiet, then oddly curated, like she was building a version of herself that didn't include me. She started wearing perfume again. the one she used to save for anniversaries. I noticed everything. The late-night showers, the turned-away screen, the extra care with her makeup before casual drinks. And still, I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only armor you have left. One Thursday, she said she had a work dinner. Nothing fancy, just some new clients in town. I nodded, smiled, asked what time she'd be home. Late, she said, without meeting my eyes. As she left, I waited 5 minutes, grabbed my keys, and followed. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because I needed to stop lying to myself. She didn't drive toward downtown like she said. Instead, she made a left away from the restaurants, the office buildings, the truth. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. She parked outside a small apartment complex I didn't recognize. Not high-end, not rundown, just ordinary. Like the kind of place where real lives begin and double lives bloom. I watched her sit in the car for a moment, fixing her hair in the mirror. Then she smiled, that real smile, the one I hadn't seen in months, and buzzed herself in. She didn't look back. I sat in the dark, frozen. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because the thing I'd been avoiding had finally arrived. There was no more room for denial. No more maybes or what-ifs. She wasn't mine anymore. She just hadn't told me yet. She came home with leftovers, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "I missed you." She didn't lie with fear in her eyes. She lied with ease, like I was no longer worth the truth. She left me long before she walked away. She just needed time to make it look like I was the one who failed. She walked through the door like it was any other night. Takeout bag in one hand, jacket draped casually over her arm, and that smile, the one I used to live for. The one that had once been real. She kissed me on the cheek. "I missed you," she said. And it almost broke me. Not because I believed her, but because, once upon a time, I would have. I watched her move around the kitchen, pulling out cartons of food she didn't eat, humming a tune she hadn't hummed in months. Her steps were light, practiced. Her voice smooth. A woman in love with her own performance. I asked how dinner went, my voice steady. She didn't flinch. "Boring," she replied, rolling her eyes. One of those nights where everyone talks too much and says nothing. She was lying. I knew it. She knew I knew it. But she didn't care. And that was the revelation. It wasn't the secret messages. It wasn't the cologne or the missed calls or the apartment buzzer I watched her press. It was this. The way she could look me in the eyes and tell me a story she knew I wouldn't believe because she no longer needed me to. That was the real betrayal. Not that she was unfaithful, but that she didn't even bother to hide it with the fear of being caught. She sat on the couch that night, scrolling through her phone, laughing softly to herself, and I realized I was a ghost in my own home. A placeholder. A name on paperwork and dinner reservations. She had already left me. Emotionally. Spiritually. Completely. She just hadn't told me yet. And I, like a fool in love with a memory, kept waiting for her to come back. But people don't return to places they've already burned down. I didn't confront her with rage. I simply stopped pretending. I thought leaving her would feel like losing a limb. Turns out it was like taking off a coat I didn't realize was soaked in someone else's perfume. She didn't ask me to stay. And I didn't give her a reason to. There was no fight. No screaming match. No cinematic showdown in the living room. Just a quiet shift. The kind you feel in your bones before you even name it. I stopped asking where she was going. Stopped pretending to care when she came home late. Stopped looking for signs because by then the signs were everywhere and they no longer hurt. They just confirmed what I already knew. That whatever we had was over. I still made coffee in the mornings. Still folded the laundry. But something in me had turned off. Not bitterly, not dramatically. Like a light left on too long finally burning out. One morning, I told her I was going to stay with my brother for a while. Just said it over breakfast, like I was mentioning a weather change. She didn't ask why. She just nodded. Didn't even look up from her phone. And in that silence, everything was said. No apology. No denial. No questions. Not even a goodbye. I packed a small bag. Just the essentials. The rest, the photos, the books we picked together, the anniversary cards. None of it mattered anymore. Those things belonged to another version of us. One I didn't recognize. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel broken. I felt clean. Not whole. Not yet. But free. She didn't chase me. Didn't text later to ask where I'd gone or what I needed. And that hurt more than anything she could have said. Because now I knew I hadn't left her. She had already let me go. Long ago. Quietly. Without warning. And I'd been the only one holding on. She said I gave up too easily. Funny. She'd already let go months before I even knew. Some endings don't break your heart. They just peel away the illusion that it was ever whole. She let go in silence. I stayed in the noise. Came months later. A message out of nowhere. Late at night, when the world was still and I had finally begun to breathe again. I miss us, she wrote. You gave up too easily. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, just distance. Like watching a stranger recall a memory they never earned. She said I gave up, but she had let go long before I ever stepped out the door. She let go when she stopped choosing me, when she stopped telling the truth, when her phone held more intimacy than her eyes ever did. There was no us left to fight for. What we had didn't explode. It dissolved, quietly, like fog at sunrise, there then gone. I never replied to that message, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. I learned something in the silence that followed, that not all betrayals are loud. Some whisper their way through locked phones, distant stares, and suddenly unfamiliar touches. That love doesn't always end with slammed doors or screaming matches. Sometimes it just stops showing up. I still think about her from time to time, not with longing but with clarity. She was the lesson I didn't want, but probably needed. I don't hate her. I hate who I became trying to keep her.